Hi, Dani. Welcome to our time team introduction to a site sort of thing. 5,000 tons of stone was the title. It reminded me a bit of those places where, if you're wandering in the woods and you see a sort of tumble of stones, or you're out on a walk and you see various stones layered on top of other stones, and part of you thinks, I wonder how old that is. And you then have to start unthreading it to try and tell the story. And it's quite a difficult job to do, often because they've been looked over by antiquarians and generally poked around with. But this was quite an enigma, this site. In general, which bits do you remember from the programme? Which bits sort of caught your eye?
Well, I think the very fact that just how much of it is still there, just it's called 5,000 tons of stone, and it quite literally is, isn't it? And trying desperately to actually date it, you sort of think something with a structure of that size. I think it's something about 75 meters by 90 meters ish. So it's huge. They reckon in parts it was probably at least 3 meters tall. So it's this really massively substantial structure. But they weren't able to date it. And you'd think you'd be able to with something like that. It's standing archaeology,
I think there was, Mick had a go at sort of maybe Iron Age and then maybe a bit of Dark Age insertion, but it was all almost typographic or architectural, or the sense of the place, almost though it had been very efficiently cleared out at some point in the past.
Yeah, I think, the conclusion was that it was probably late Iron Age. And it does make sense. You've got the Brigantes tribe up there in the north before the Romans arrived, and during. They were not very happy with the Romans, particularly in the 1st century. And you've also got Deer Street and Hadrian's Wall quite nearby as well, Deer Street being a Roman road. So the idea that it was maybe built in the late Iron Age and continued perhaps to be used throughout the Roman period, and then on later into the post-Roman period as well. But it would have just been fantastic to get some dated evidence. And I know that the environmental archaeologist, Emma, was trying her absolute best, wasn't she? I don't know how many core samples she took. I think it was quite a lot. And unfortunately, I know it says in the programme she was hoping to be able to date them, but in the report, which was produced afterwards, there weren't quite enough, the samples weren't quite enough to actually enable us to date it. So it still remains an enigma.
And I think it was one of those sites, I felt in the end that, it was exactly rather one of those unloved sites that might have been stared at for hundreds of years without anybody thinking, right, let's see what we can find, because prehistoric finds came up. I think there was some flint. The antiquarian report contained various bits and pieces. But as Mick said, fundamentally, you're in an aceramic world here of the Iron Age. Most of the objects associated with them would have rotted away, and you're just left with these huge chunks of stone. The other thing I think came out of it is, as everybody knows by now, when we're on a site, we have a team from Wessex, and their job is to effectively record what's in the trenches. And often it's a question of recording the stratigraphy and where the finds come from. But in this case, they were able to get out their stone drawing skills, but they were actually drawing every stone in a structure and recording whether they appeared to be a part of the original structure or a rebuild. Along with those, we had, I think it was Steve Thompson often, and the guys who were doing lovely photographs to show you what the view was. And it wasn't as though we thought, this might be a Brigantes palace or something astonishing, or a Roman fort. It was uncertain about it, but whatever it was, there it was getting the full Wessex report treatment, which I thought I was kind of rather pleased to see it. And of course, Emma Tetlow was doing environmental archaeology. For those of you watching who don't know, Dani, do you want to talk about the environmentalist on site? And they often turn up with long corers and disappear into the mud somewhere. What do they give you on a site, and what do you hope to get from an environmental archaeologist?
Well, they're looking for evidence, so that with a core sample, it's almost like an apple core, but huge, if that makes sense. And they'll go down as far as they can. I think in this case, Emma managed to get down, I think, about 3 meters. And they're taking kind of sections of the soil, really. And quite often it's amazing when you can see it. So they, drill down, pull it up, and then you can see all the soil in section over the years, over thousands of years. You might have sand here, or a really dark patchy bit where there was a lot of charcoal. There might be a bit then more further on in time when they're forming, so you get lots of seeds and so on. So with that, you're kind of looking for the environmental evidence, things like seeds to see whether it was grassland and so on. With this, I know that she found there was a particular kind of beetle that really likes to live in dung heaps, more or less. And that sounds crazy, but that demonstrates that the beetles there, therefore there's a lot of dung there, therefore there's occupation, there's animals and there's people about. So, it sounds crazy. Oh, we found a beetle, but it can tell you lots and lots of things.
On one dig, we had a gentleman when we were looking at prehistoric mammoth remains, and the range of beetles, he was able to tell there were beetles associated with mammoth dung. There's that sort of beetle. Then there was a beetle associated with dead mammoths, who like to sit on top of dead mammoths, obviously less discerning beetle. And then there was another beetle who arrived much later and sort of floated around when everything was pretty much dissolved into the background.
Right.
And he was very precise about, he could sort of take you through a site, and depending, not always beetles, but a range of insects. And my goodness, he knew his stuff, that guy.
Oh, fantastic. That sounds amazing. It's crazy to think, isn't it, really? Like you've got one mammal, one mammoth, but it's being affected by all these different insects at different stages of its life cycle, and what that can tell us. It's amazing.
And I know with environmentalists that it's also very useful. You can get slightly different forms of, I think they're called foraminifera, something like that, whether it's saltwater diatoms or freshwater diatoms. And they can actually take the core contents and have a look at the difference between things. So it's often this very, they tend to huddle away around their microscopes in the corner of the dig somewhere and are looking at the finest. I think we had another program in this series where we were looking at the grains, because grains can tell you quite a bit. You and I know that, there's a distinct difference between, say, Emma wheat, prehistoric wheat, and a more modern wheat. And the different seeds they produce actually preserve. And I remember sometimes we would collect together bags of this material and attempt to grow stuff from it.
I know you've told me that before, and I think was that Mick having a go at doing that? Was he growing some in his garden?
Often Mick would take away a bag of this stuff, which had been got from 3 or 4 meters down, lay it on a sort of trestle table and water it, and literally up would come the plants that had been around there 1,000 years ago or something.
That's amazing to think.
And I think that's great fun. So there it was. There's 5,000 tons of stone. I think I was pleased in the end that we'd actually shown this somewhat neglected monument a bit of interest, and also that the particularly the recording crew had stuck to their job of drawing a large number of that 5,000 tons of stone, which you can see in the report. We'll perhaps bring that up for people to have a look at. There was a sort of element of persistence about that site. Despite it not being a palace, anything grand, we just wanted to record it and find out what we could.
I just think it's amazing that it's still standing, really. You know, if it is Iron Age, the fact that it's still standing is just unbelievable. And it sort of makes you wonder about other walls that you walk past, you know, dry stone walls that you see, how long they've really been there. And I actually really like Stuart's point as well about actually we need to look at other sites in the area that are similar and look at where they sit in the landscape to try and get a greater understanding of these sites in the landscape. I thought that was an important point to make.
It makes you wonder. I think that's a very good point that, you know, when you're going on these walks, you just see a sort of some old rumble of buildings and stone lying around, and it actually might be quite ancient. So have a look at that this weekend, 5,000 tons of stone, and we'll be putting up the report to show you the persistent work of the recording team, and we hope you enjoy it.